you confine him to Trinidad and Tobago, and he will feel imprisoned, claustrophobic. You take your wife and lock her in the toilet for the night. It could be a very comfortable toilet, but she's not accustomed to be locked up in a toilet all night. And that is, to that person, a term of imprisonment. You see, Mr. Speaker, I have to explain it in a way that the national community will understand that there are criminals that need to be locked up because they are dangerous and they are a threat. And then you have other persons who commit acts of indiscretion, you know, in the moment. And what this act seeks to do and serves to do is to give the court options. Instead of putting that man and destroying him in a prison, you could put an electronic monitoring device on him and tell him you cannot leave your home. At least his wife will have, and his wife and his children will have the comfort of their husband and their father with them at the home. He may not be able to go out. He is confined. He is imprisoned. But in his own mind, his liberty has been taken from him. And this is what this progressive bit of legislation is all about. That's just one aspect of it, Mr. Speaker. So as I say, Mr. Speaker, these provisions would be inconsistent with the right of the individual to equality before the law and the protection of the law which is guaranteed in Section 4B of the Constitution. Mr. Speaker, this right is an intrinsic right which every democratic nation must guard jealously. It may be argued that this right is abrogated where the electronic monitoring program requires participants, as I said before, to pay user fees. Some have identified this move as a form of discrimination against youths and the poor. It should be noted, however, that most electronically monitored house arrest programs the world over charge user fees, and the offender is also required to have a court-approved residence and a telephone. Offenders lacking these resources may find themselves faced with no other alternative but lockup or prison. Mr. Speaker, we have made provision in this bill to address these potential inequities by introducing a sliding fee schedule which would take into account the means of the offender. At the same time, electronic monitoring will afford an individual with limited financial means an opportunity to return home while awaiting trial, where he would have more than likely been forced to remain in custody until the end of his trial due to his inability to secure bail. Clause 14 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, would interfere with the right of the individual to respect for his private and family life as guaranteed under Section 4C of the Constitution. Those critical of the initiatives contemplated by this bill may also cite potential adverse social effects associated with the visibility of both the body-worn and residential equipment. It is submitted, however, Mr. Speaker, that the interference of the privacy rights of a participant in the electronic monitoring program will be an interference that is consented to by the participant. Consent is necessary. I repeat it. Consent is necessary for participation, and such consent would be sought from both the offender and other adults residing in the offender's household. By obtaining this consent, Mr. Speaker, our government is confident that any associated hardships will be fully anticipated, appreciated, and accepted by persons given their consent. Regarding the potential intrusiveness of electronic monitoring, it must be borne in mind by the members of this honorable House, those who are listening and those who are not, those who will sit down and talk and not even stand up and make a contribution. It must be borne in mind by our members here, fellow parliamentarians who are elected by the people to make a contribution in the House on their behalf, and not to remain silent, and not to go afterwards and make press conferences, but to speak on the floor of the House with respect to the matters that are before this honorable House. Please, I repeat it, because when we bring all these progressive measures and we stand up here and we are ready on this side, completely ready, all members ready to speak, and of the 12 members on the other side, they can only muster 2 people to speak, it means that the opposition is in shambles and not representing the people who elected them. So I expect today to hear many speakers on this measure. So those who have not prepared, start taking notes now. Regarding the potential intrusiveness of electronic monitoring, it must be borne in mind, honorable members, that even though the physical attachment of a device to a person can be both physically and psychologically invasive, such attachment would not be performed without the consent of the participant. This is so critical. Consent will always be without coercion. There's no coercion. And the participant will be fully informed via explanation and demonstration of the device and its operation. It is my considered opinion as the Minister of Justice, as the member for St. Joseph, for whom I speak in this House, Mr. Speaker, that although fundamental rights and freedoms are being curtailed, a court would be hard-pressed to declare that the proposed legislation is not reasonably justifiable in a society that has a proper respect for the rights and freedoms of the individual. It is with the collective interests of all our citizens in mind that I appeal to all members of this honorable House not only to support the bill, but to speak in its support.
Let's hear you.
Part 1 of the bill, Mr. Speaker, comprises Clause 3 as well, which would provide the interpretation provision. In this clause, competent authority is defined to include a statutory board, a tribunal, or any other authority or functionary appointed under any written law. The Ministry of Justice intends, in the very near future, to bring legislation to this honorable House introducing a system of parole, which is a widely utilized form of early release from imprisonment, to be granted in respect of certain offenders. The imposition of electronic monitoring on parolees by a parole board is a recognized practice and would be provided for under this clause. Electronic monitoring of young persons or juveniles. I'm sure that this will be of interest to the member for Digo Martin Central. Mr. Speaker, with regard to the possible imposition of electronic monitoring on certain juveniles, we would like to assure this honorable House that this practice obtains in other jurisdictions that we sometimes look to for guidance on policy issues as regards criminal justice reform. Electronic monitoring programs reduce the number of juvenile offenders that would otherwise be placed in secure residential facilities, thereby allowing them to remain under surveillance at home. And more importantly, while they attend school, work, and places of worship, for example. This option provides youth with the ability to be supervised in the least restrictive manner in lieu of detention, with the aim of disrupting the offending behavior of persistent youth offenders through strict monitoring and enforcement. Of note, Mr. Speaker, is a 2004 report from the State of North Carolina Department of Juvenile Justice, which demonstrates that 75% of juveniles who were released from the electronic monitoring programs were considered successful. These programs have the advantage of restricting an offender's activities while minimally disrupting productive social behavior. Another American study conducted as far back as 1989 by Michael Charles titled, as the Honorable Member for Chaguanas West likes to hear it. Titled. It's from the world of squires. And published in the Journal of Contemporary Criminal Justice, shows that the social and psychological impacts of electronic monitoring on juveniles are positive. Now, we're not dealing with 19th century barnacles. We're dealing with 21st century electronic monitoring. In the United Kingdom, the Criminal Justice and Police Act 2001 introduced new powers for the electronic monitoring of juvenile offenders on bail. The Home Office initially made electronic monitoring of juveniles aged 12 to 16 on bail or remand available to the courts. Powers to tag 17-year-olds were introduced in a street crime initiative in July 2002. Mr. Speaker, I now come to Part 2 of the bill, which comprises clauses 4 to 7 and deals with the establishment of the Electronic Monitoring Unit, which will be a unit within the Ministry of Justice. Mr. Speaker, Clause 5 of the bill stipulates that the Electronic Monitoring Unit shall be responsible for ensuring the security of the electronic monitoring system, for retrieving and analyzing information, and for reporting any non-compliance or breaches with a court decision or decision of a competent authority. The unit will also report on breaches related to the use of electronic monitoring devices. This unit will do so, Mr. Speaker, by providing near real-time tracking of the location of offenders and reporting alarm notifications, signal loss, device malfunction, or device tampering forthwith to the electronic monitoring manager. Mr. Speaker, this system is, when operationalized, is so effective that it could even place two persons being monitored on the same bed in the same house. So, Mr. Speaker, it is a very important and significant piece of electronic equipment. This unit being proposed by the government is not unlike other electronic monitoring units set up in other jurisdictions for the purpose of implementing electronic monitoring systems. Under the Penal Code, Electronic Monitoring Rules 2010, made pursuant